So I just want to say thank you so much for having me here, because it's just an honor just to be able to share my testimony and just to talk with everyone. And it's awesome. I know a few people, so that's a good thing. I always like to start with just giving my testimony, just because that's where God always leads me to go with this. So I started running when I was 11 years old. They asked me to come out for the high school track team. One of my friends did. And I said, well, sure, I'll do it. And I did it, and I was pretty good at it, so I really enjoyed it. That's when I started running, at least about 2 to 3 miles a day, since I was 11. I ran my 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th grade year. My 9th grade year is when I guess, fell in love with a boy, and he introduced me to the world of, like, drugs and alcohol, premarital sex, all that worldly stuff. And it kind of, my priorities shifted. It shifted from the competing and using my gift that God gave me to doing things that was just leading me away from God's plan for my life. I started smoking weed daily. I started drinking alcohol pretty regularly. My life just kind of slowly unraveled. I stayed on that path for, well, about 14 years. And whenever I was 15 years old, I overdosed on Xanax. I took about 30 Xanaxes in 1 hour, if you can imagine. If you've ever taken one or two, it totally blocks out your whole memory. You have no idea what's going on. And I'd never taken them before. I thought it looked fun. And I ended up in the ICU at Bellefonte. It was only a few months later, and I ended up back in the ICU at Bellefonte for overdosing on alcohol. During that time, my mom and dad, they stood by me. They prayed for me. They put me in Christian drug counseling, which we had to go every Friday. And I hated it. And sometimes I would even go to it high, and my mom didn't know it. But they never gave up on me, and they kept praying for me, and they knew God had a plan for me. Whenever I was 9 years old, I did get saved, and I truly believe I was saved. I remember it very clearly. I remember going to revival with my parents. I remember Brother John Powell was the preacher at revival, and I remember, crying to my dad in his room and saying, Dad, I don't know if I'm saved. I need the Lord. So I remember that. I know I was saved during all my rebellious years. During this whole time, I did run daily, but I just never used my gift like God had intended me to use. It was a year ago in July. It'll be 1 year. It was the second week of July last year, and we got back from vacation. I started a great program called Master Life through our church. I don't know if anyone's ever done that, but it's like a discipleship program. And that first week of the discipleship program, it was about obeying God. Something so simple, I guess it just never hit me. Like, yeah, that's what it's all about. We have to obey God. So that week we kind of spent at the beach drinking a little bit. And when I got back, I told my husband, I said, I can't do this anymore. I can't live two lives. I've lived this double life for 14 years now. I would go to church on Sundays, and then on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, just, drink, get high, whatever I wanted to do, and not do God's work. So I told him I can't do it anymore. I said, you need to make up your mind what you want to do. So I took my boys, and we left. And we left for 3 days just to give my husband, kind of a reality check. So that's when, after that, me and him decided together that, it was time to just give our lives totally to God. So we did that. And since then, since giving my entire life to God, I've experienced so much amazing joy and just how God is willing to use you if you'll just give it all to Him. February of 2012, I ran my first marathon, and it was in Myrtle Beach. I qualified for Boston there. You actually have to qualify to get in the Boston Marathon based on your age and your running times. So I did that then. Well, then that following July is when I gave my life to God, surrendered my life to God. In September of that year, I ran the Dayton Marathon. My time improved, and I said, all right, I'm going to do this. I'm going to sign up for Boston, and we'll see where this takes me. So I signed up for Boston, and I got in. Well, about 2 weeks after I got in, I found out I had mono, which was totally discouraging. You know, mono can last anywhere from 6 weeks to 6 months to a year. So I'm like, God, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? I was very discouraged, went to talk to my preacher, and he's like, Amy, God's bigger than mono. You haven't even started training yet. Don't worry about it. So I'm like, you know what? You're right. So I, one day on a run, I told God, I'm like, God, just, you know, mono or not, you gave it to me. You'll handle this. So he healed me. By the time it was time to start training in December, I was totally good to go. During my training, I ran some of my best times I've ever ran. My running was at the top of its game. I did get injured a few times during the Boston training. Running up Ashland Avenue 6, 7, 8 times, you know, in an hour or two, it tears up your body. So, but he got me through that. And then, you know, Mark came to me and said, can we do this article? And I said, well, sure. I had no idea where God was going to take this. I couldn't even imagine where he was going to take it. But through the article, I was able to express my faith and become that bold witness. I'd ask God, please, God, make me a bold witness, because I was always intimidated because everyone knew me for the drugs and alcohol, or if they didn't know that, they just knew me, you know, they didn't know me as a Christian. So God used that to bring me out and to, you know, to be a bold witness for him. And in Boston, you know, we knew there was going to be about 500,000 spectators in Boston, and we wanted to use this as a mission for God. So we decided to pass out gospel tracts while we were there. My dad said, how about 500? And I like to challenge myself. So I said, well, how about 1,200, Dad? We'll just double it. So we passed out gospel tracts while we were there. We passed out the This Was Your Life tract. I don't know if anyone's seen it or familiar with the chick tracts, but they're awesome little things. And you know, the first couple of days we were there, us adults, there was 22 of us, were kind of intimidated. But our children, they were just passing them out like candy. They were on fire for God. And I'm like, you know, that's how we need to be. We don't need to be, like, hidden or ashamed of our God. But then race day Monday was when the bombs went off. And that's when we realized, you know, we don't have time to be afraid. We don't have time to be ashamed or scared. So those bombs set us all on fire, literally, for God. And we got all 1,200 tracts passed out. And when those bombs went off, people were like, where was God in this? You know, why would God allow this to happen? Then they published this magazine, I guess, a couple days after the bombing. And there's one of our tracts laying right there, right next to a blown-off foot. And, you know, God was right there. God was in the midst of that. You know, God doesn't cause things like this. Sin does, but he may allow it. But God was right in the midst of all that. And that was really encouraging. And our kids were like, oh, my, you know, because they could see their work. But after that bomb, it was amazing how receptive those people were in Boston to God's word. And sometimes, you know, it takes a tragedy like that to make us depend on God. And that's kind of what happened in my life. You know, I almost killed myself twice. When I was 17, I got in a car wreck and had to have 300 stitches in my face, 6 hours of plastic surgery. I had Botox, all that in one night in the ER from a car wreck. And, you know, God brought me through the 2 overdoses. He brought me through the car wreck. He brought me through the bombs at Boston. And I know it's because God still has work for me to do. And my 22 family members, they were standing right next to bomb number 1, well, within about 20 feet, all day long. They got there at 6:30 in the morning and stood by that bomb till about 2 minutes before it detonated. And all of them walked off about 2 minutes. So, you know, I could have lost my entire family. You know, life could have been changed drastically, but God spared all of us. And I know he spared us because we have work for him to do. I mean, I don't know why else he would keep me around. So, 2 weeks before I went to Boston, I was running, and I've always wanted to do an ultra marathon, which is anything more than a marathon. A marathon's 26.2 miles. And I said, God, if I don't get injured in Boston, I'll do an ultra marathon for you. And then he gave me this thought, because when I run, you know, I spend about 80% of my time in prayer, whether it's an hour run or a 4-hour run. 80% of that is in prayer. It's what kind of strengthens me when I get weak. I said, God, I'll do it, and I'll do it for you. I said, I'll run for missions. If I don't get injured in Boston, I'll run for missions. So we do Boston. Don't get injured at all. I feel wonderful after the fact. Even escaped 2 bombs. So I'm like, all right, Lord, I'll do it. So I've signed up for the Nashville Ultra Marathon. It's a 50-mile race. It's November 2nd. But what I'm asking, and this is just because I feel God's called me to do this, and I want to do His work. And, He says to spread His word out throughout the nations, because His word does change lives. It changed my life completely, 100%. It changed my husband's life. I know it's alive and active, and it changes lives. And He tells us to get it out to the nations. So that's what I want to do. I'm asking people to sponsor me, even 50 cents a mile. $25 would pay for almost an entire year of Christian schooling and a meal every day for these children in Africa that I'm running for. It's the Penny Paris schools. They were started through Unity Baptist. They're actually started and named after the late Penny Paris, Pastor Floyd Paris's wife. She passed away, and they started these schools in her memory. But it's Christian education, the only schooling that these children even have an opportunity to get in this remote tribe in Moyo, Uganda. But they provide a meal a day. And just for $25 or 50 cents a mile, we could send one child almost for an entire year of schooling. $1 a mile would pay for more than a year of schooling. So that's what I'm running for. I'm running to spread God's word. If we can get the children, then we can get the parents, and then, we can eventually get the whole tribes in these areas. I believe God's called me to do this, and I just want to do what He has for me to do. So that's kind of how He's using my running, and I think that's about it. Oh yeah, the website. Everyone got a card. If you are interested in helping with this mission, or sponsoring me, or even if you can't give, but you can pray for me, if you go to amyforafrica.com, it shows everything we're doing. There's a space there where you can donate. There's some bronze, silver, and gold clubs you can be in, or if you don't want to donate that much, if you only want to donate $1, go on there and donate $1, because $1 can make a big difference. I was thinking today, like, Jesus used the 5 loaves and 2 fish, and fed thousands of people. So $5 could feed ultimately thousands of people, whether it's God's word or through food. But God can take something small and make it so big. So if any of you would be willing just to help me out, help those children out, and if you're not in the state where you can give, just please put us on your prayer list, and just pray for the mission, pray for my health, pray for the website. A runner can't get injured and run 50 miles. So if you'll just pray for my health, that would be an awesome thing too. And but I would really appreciate anyone's support, because we just want to do God's work, and God's called us to do this. So.